Understanding Type 2 Diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a metabolic disorder that causes sugar, in the form of glucose, to accumulate in the blood rather than being used as fuel by the cells in our body. When we eat, food is broken down by our digestive system into nutrient molecules that are then absorbed through our digestive tract for use by the body. Foods containing carbohydrates or various sugars are broken down into glucose. Glucose is an important source of fuel for many organs in our body. However, to be able to use the glucose for fuel, the glucose molecule must first enter into the cell. The pancreas produces a hormone called insulin, a chemical messenger essential for the entry of glucose into cells. As the blood glucose levels rise after a meal, insulin is released into the bloodstream and sets processes in motion to trigger the removal of glucose from the blood to enter into the cells. In type 2 diabetes, the cells become resistant to insulin and ignore its message to absorb glucose. This is known as insulin resistance. In addition, in type 2 diabetes, the pancreas is unable to produce the greater amounts of insulin needed to trigger these resistant cells to take in glucose from the bloodstream. The most notable symptom of diabetes is frequent urination and excessive thirst. Other symptoms include weakness, drowsiness, and blurred vision. These are caused by chemical imbalances in the blood related to high levels of blood glucose. About 1 in 4 people with type 2 diabetes are unaware that they have the disease. It is important to catch diabetes early. Over time, high blood glucose damages the blood vessels, which can damage the organs that these vessels supply, leading to a variety of health complications. Damage to the small or micro blood vessels can cause vision problems, including loss of sight, nerve damage, and kidney disease. Damage to larger or macro blood vessels can lead to cardiovascular complications such as heart disease, stroke, and poor blood circulation. Overweight and inactivity are major causes of diabetes. A family history of diabetes significantly increases your risk of developing the disease. Certain ethnic populations are also at increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Finally, some medications may increase your diabetes risk, specifically corticosteroids, thiazide diuretics, drugs used to treat certain mental illnesses, and some antiretrovirals used to treat HIV infection. In summary, type 2 diabetes is a metabolic disorder. It causes sugar, in the form of glucose, to accumulate in the blood rather than being used as fuel for the cells in our body. If not diagnosed and treated in a timely manner, type 2 diabetes can lead to many health complications.
Hi, my name is Jerry Royce. I am the owner of Positive Power XXI Christian Media. My family established our first business in 1993. We started a community newspaper, we did book publishing, we had an online magazine. In 2006, we went online with podcasting up to 2009. In 2013, I established a radio program under positivepower21.org. And in 2016, established Positive Power XXI media, Christian media for TV, radio, and films. So I dropped from my family business of Royce Enterprises and established Positive Power XXI. I have 2 degrees in studio production, web development, print management, graphic design, corporate communications, which incorporate everything under multimedia, digital media, and social media. Why I want to do this film? I think it's real important. I don't think people really know enough about the disease, but also they don't know enough about what the people who have this disease is living with, what they go through day to day just to live a normal life, just to be able to function, to have a lifestyle, to be able to enjoy the benefits of God's green earth. I became sick with diabetes in 2014, and I reversed it in 3 months. I was determined. I was spending a lot of money. I think I spent $1,000 just in eyewear. The medication, I was on 2 pills, one for cholesterol, one for the diabetes supplement metformin, and I was also on the insulin. But the reason why I knew I reversed it because I started having some kind of side effects with the insulin, a lot of itching, rashes and stuff around where I was putting the injections. And so what happened was my prescription ran out and my doctor had relocated to New York, and therefore I was without primary care. So a friend introduced the doctor, wasn't too far from the job, and she tested me and found out that it was gone. She said it was the first time she had ever had anybody, and she knew it could be done, but she had no patients that's ever done it. I was the first one. So referred me to a nutritionist so I can learn how to eat properly, because the first doctor was really educated on it, you know, step by step. But this doctor I found didn't know as much about it as I thought. So through my research, I found out that there was such thing as an endocrinologist, a person that specializes in everything about the body, the whole endo system, which is very complex. Found out there's only 5,000 of these specialists in this nation. And that was just my visit on Blue Cross Blue Shield website when I was looking for one. And I found a young lady who had a YouTube page, and I found out there was a lot of these doctors were putting a lot of information on YouTube, but everybody was saying different things. One thing I found out about diabetes is that no one person has the same situation with it. Because the system is so complex, you're talking about you're dealing with hormones, you're talking about your pancreas, your kidneys, your liver, your heart, your stomach, your brain, anything that's affected by hormones is affected. Diabetes can affect it. And basically, the whole issue is, I'm finding out, I think it's just the food, the processed food. And my doctor, my new doctor, my endocrinologist said, and I'll never forget it, he said, a lot of anything is bad for you. So you have to find out, like medication, what is the specific measurement of anything you eat? And that's what I'm starting to find out. You know, whether everybody can't eat the same amount, whether it's too much or too little. So in my opinion, I think that's where, I think you have to treat food like it's a medicine. You know, like, so one person can eat a half of a chicken and it won't affect them. But another person eating a half of a chicken, it can affect them. Because the fat of the chicken, or the protein, or the sugar, whatever's going in your system to help provide energy for your cells, is not going to be absorbed into the cells because the fat, it's the animal fat that's keeping it from absorbing. So you have to find out how much or how little can you eat before that happens. And I think that's the main problem. And then the problem happens in the kidney and the pancreas. They're broken down where they're not producing enough insulin to handle the amount of glucose that's going into the blood to help energize your body, because that's what you need for energy. So if you can't produce insulin, then they have to use insulin. And basically I found out that insulin is pig insulin. It's not even human insulin. And so I've been finding out a lot about it. And I think the reason why I want to do this film is because not only the individuals who's living with it don't know a lot about it, but they just have to learn what works for them, what doesn't work for them. But the families don't understand sometimes what you're going through. Now this is your mom and she's helping you out from day one with type 1, which is early diabetes for children. And normally most adults don't get it until they're adults, like over 50. Because I found out my grandmother didn't get it till she was 70, type 2. My dad didn't get it till he was in his 60s after he retired. And I didn't get it until I was, in my 50s. So that's some of the things I'm finding out about type 2. What is happening to the body. So with all the films and that's out there right now, well, I found 3. And 2 of them found to be very good, but it was leading up to you, at the end result, becoming a vegan. So basically they were just trying to sell the fact that becoming a vegan is more healthy than you eating an animal protein diet. So with this film, I want to be able to educate, empower, and inspire those who's living with it. And at the same time, educate those who don't know anything about it, who's living with individuals who living with it, and be able to understand what they go through. It's a lot. It's a lot that they go through. I know me, the mornings are just horrible. But once I get going, I'm okay. But then you have your ups and your downs through the days. When your energy is high, you try to do as much as you can. When it's low, it's just what it is. So you try to take advantage of it as much as you can when your energy is high, because it's not going to stay up there long. You're talking about this is in between your 3 meals that this stuff is happening. But you got to eat. So I'm really pumped up about this. The people who are interested in seeing this film be developed, the subjects who are going to be part of this, the other talent, I'm just so excited about it. I think it's going to be a good film because it's going to help shed light on what people don't know about diabetes, whether type 1 or type 2. I've been in these groups on Facebook, and every day there's somebody coming in and don't understand why they're feeling this way. I remember reading about a college student. It hit her in her I guess early 20s. And she couldn't figure out why she was so tired certain times of the day. She just wanted to sleep and still wake up tired. And that was really confusing to her until she went to the doctor to find out what was going on. And a lot of times, general practitioners can misdiagnose you unless they're pulling, your AC1 count to find out what's been going on the last 3 months. So it's a lot to learn about it. Wow, it's incredible how the human body is made up. But there's one thing is out of whack. One thing is out of whack can destroy you. And why I say destroy you? Because I've lost 1 childhood friend, which was a very close cousin, and 2 best friends. One was my brother-in-law, and the other one was my best friend from church. And they were normally functioning guys, but when they got in their 60s, then that's when something happened. And they no longer could carry the same diet they was living. You couldn't consume the amount of colas and things like that. And one thing I found out about it, that it can affect your hormones in your brain too, because you can deprive of energy to the cells in your brain, because your brain needs energy. And so that's what I'm saying. You have your good and your bad periods during the day. So anyway, that's another reason why I want to make this film, is because I lost 3 friends, and I have another childhood friend I grew up who's going through it. And this guy was an athlete, always was a gifted athlete, very smart. And I found out that he lost 2 of his toes because he had stepped on something, cut his foot, and didn't know it, and it got infected on him. So in order to keep the infection from spreading, normally when they find out that the toe or the foot or whatever is no longer functioning properly because the nerves and the tissues is dead, they have to amputate it. So you have to be really careful with this disease. You have to really take care of yourself. You just can't go without certain things, taking care of your feet, washing your feet, clipping your nails. I don't have any problems in that area, but sometimes my left arm will go numb. For almost a year, I said since 2016, I had a small injury with my left arm, and that thing just would never get right. I'd be sleeping, it would just go weak. So, like I said, it's so much different things how it affect people. Memory. So my memory is like bad. I was doing really well in class, in 2015 to 2016, and then when it was time for me to actually do the work, I just couldn't retain nothing, and I would just get tired and, just couldn't push no more. So it's a lot about it that's different. It's a dirty disease. And that's why I'm going to name this film Living with Dirty Diana. I named her Diana because I got tired of saying the word diabetes, so I'm just going to call her Diana. So we're Living with Dirty Diana is the name of the film. Type 1, Type 2. Educating, empowering, and inspiring those who's living with it. So I hope you jump on this wagon with us to see this film get developed, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But I want you to be part of it. I know you want to be part of it because it can happen to anybody. That's the thing about it. It can happen to anybody at any time. You can just wake up one day and not feel well, from a meal that you've been used to eating, whether it was seafood, red meat, white meat, and now your body's saying no to it. It could just happen, just like it happened to my dad, it happened to two of my best friends, it happened to my cousin. It can happen to anybody. So help me make this film. I'm Jerry Woods, live worldwide. Take care, everybody. See you soon.
The best job in the world. I'm a doctor. No, believe me, that's not why. I'm an obesity doctor. I have the honor of working with a group of people subject to the last widely accepted prejudice, being fat. These people have suffered a lot by the time they see me. Shame, guilt, blame, and outright discrimination. The attitude that many take, including those in healthcare, is that these people are to blame for their situation. If they could just control themselves, they wouldn't be overweight, and they're not motivated to change. Please let me tell you, this is not the case. The blame, if we've got to extend some here, has been with our advice, and it's time we change that. Obesity is a disease. It's not something created by lack of character. It's a hormonal disease, and there are many hormones involved, and one of the main ones is a hormone called insulin. Most obese individuals are resistant to this hormone, insulin. So what does that mean exactly, to be resistant to insulin? Well, insulin resistance is essentially a state of pre-pre type 2 diabetes. Insulin's job is to drive glucose or blood sugar into the cells where it can be used. In a nutshell, when someone is insulin resistant, they're having trouble getting blood sugar where it needs to go, into those cells. And it just can't hang out in the blood after we eat, or we would all have a diabetic crisis after every meal. So when someone is resistant to insulin, the body's response to this is to just make more of it. And insulin levels will rise, and for a while, years even, this is going to keep up, and blood sugar levels can remain normal. However, usually it can't keep up forever, and even at those elevated levels of insulin are not enough to keep blood sugar in the normal range. So it starts to rise. That's diabetes. It probably won't surprise you to hear that most of my patients have insulin resistance or diabetes. And if you're sitting there thinking, that's not me, you actually might want to think again, because almost 50% of adult Americans now have diabetes or prediabetes. That is almost 120 million of us. But that's hardly everyone who has issues with insulin, because as I was saying, people have elevated insulin levels due to insulin resistance for years, even decades before the diagnosis of even prediabetes is made. Plus, it's been shown that 16 to 25% of normal weight adults are also insulin resistant. So in case you're keeping track, this is a heck of a lot of us. So the trouble with insulin resistance is, if it goes up, we are at great risk for developing type 2 diabetes. But also, insulin makes us hungry, and the food we eat much more likely to be stored as fat. Insulin is our fat storage hormone. So we can start to see how it's going to be a problem for diseases like obesity and metabolic issues like diabetes. But what if we trace this problem back to the beginning and we just didn't have so much glucose around that insulin needed to deal with? Let's take a look at how that could be. Everything you eat is either a carbohydrate, a protein, or a fat. And they all have a very different effect on glucose and therefore insulin levels, as you can see on the graph. So when we eat carbohydrates, our insulin and glucose are going to spike up fast. And with proteins, it looks a lot better. But take a look at what happens when we eat fat. Essentially nothing, a flat line. And this is going to wind up being very important. So now I want to translate that graph for you into a real-world situation. I want you to go back and think about the last time you ate an American version of Chinese food. We all know there's rules associated with this, right? And the first rule is you're going to overeat, because the stop signal doesn't get sent until you are literally busting at the seams. Rule number 2 is in an hour, you're starving. Why? Well, because the rice in that meal caused glucose and insulin to skyrocket, which triggered hunger, fat storage, and cravings. So, if you're insulin resistant to begin with, and your insulin levels are already higher, you really are hungrier all the time. And we have this set up. Eat carbs, your glucose goes up, your insulin goes up, and you have hunger and fat storage. So how do we recommend to these people to eat? Because it seems like that would be really important, and it is. Let's focus just on type 2 diabetes, because the general recommendations are to tell patients with type 2 diabetes to consume 40 to 65 grams of carbohydrates per meal, plus more at snacks. Trust me on this, that's a lot of carbs. And remember what's going to happen to glucose and insulin, blood sugar and insulin, when we eat them? Yes, we are essentially recommending that they eat exactly what's causing their problem. Sound crazy? It really, really is. Because at its root, diabetes is a state of carbohydrate toxicity. We can't get the blood sugar into the cells, and that causes a problem in the short term, but the long-term consequences are even greater. And insulin resistance is essentially a state of carbohydrate intolerance. So why, oh why, do we want to continue to recommend to people to eat them? The American Diabetes Association guidelines specifically state that there is inconclusive evidence to recommend a specific carbohydrate limit. But those guidelines go right on to say what we all know. Carbohydrate intake is the single biggest factor in blood sugar levels and therefore need for medication. These guidelines then go on to say, hey, look, if you're taking certain diabetic medications, you actually have to eat carbs. Otherwise, your blood sugar can go too low. Okay, so let's take a look at the vicious cycle that advice just set up. So it's eat carbs, so you have to take medicine. Then you have to eat more carbs so you avoid the side effect of those medications. And around we go. Even worse is that nowhere in the ADA guidelines is the goal of reversing type 2 diabetes. This needs to be changed because type 2 diabetes can be reversed in many, if not most situations, especially if we start early. Not only do we need to let people know this, but we have to start giving them the practical advice so they can do this. Consider carbs. First, here's a shocker for you. We don't need them. Seriously. Our minimum daily requirement for carbohydrates is 0. We have essential amino acids, those are proteins, essential fatty acids, but nope, no essential carb. A nutrient is essential if we have to have it to function, and we can't make it from something else. We make glucose, plenty of it, all the time. It's called gluconeogenesis. So, we don't need them. The overconsumption of them is making us very sick, yet we are continuing to recommend to patients to consume close to, if not more, than half of their total energy intake every day from them. It doesn't make sense. Let's talk about what does. Cutting carbs, a lot. Yes, in my clinic, we teach patients to eat with carbs as the minority of their intake, not the majority. So how does that work? Well, when our patients decrease their carbs, their glucose goes down, and they don't need as much insulin. So those insulin levels drop and fast. And this is very important because a study looking at our National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey data, better known as NHANES, showed that the single biggest risk factor for coronary artery disease is insulin resistance. It is responsible for a whopping 42% of heart attacks. Low-carb intervention works so fast that we can literally pull people off of hundreds of units of insulin in days to weeks. One of my favorite stories is a very recent one. A young gal, but who had an almost 20-year history of type 2 diabetes, came in when a physician from another clinic told her she was just sick and should probably get used to it. Her diabetes was way out of control. This despite the fact that she was on multiple medications, including almost 300 units of insulin that was being injected into her continuously every day via a pump. All of this, remember, blood sugar still out of control. So we put her on a low-carb diet, and now let's fast forward 4 months. She lost weight, yes, but better than that, sick no more. Her blood sugar levels were now normal all of the time. This on, get this, no diabetes medication. Gone was the 300 units of insulin, no more insulin pump, no more pricking her finger multiple times each day. Gone, all of it, no more diabetes. One of the greatest joys of my job is to be able to tell a patient like this that they no longer have diabetes, and we ceremoniously take it off their problem list together. So, are they cured? Is this a miracle? We'll leave that grandstanding to Dr. Oz. Cured would imply that it can't come back. And if they start eating excessive carbs again, it will. So no, not cured, but they don't have diabetes any longer. It's resolved, and it can stay that way as long as we keep away the cause. So what does this look like then? How does somebody eat this way? Well, first let me tell you what it's not. Low carb is not zero carb, and it is not high protein. These are common criticisms that are so frustrating because they're not true. Next, if we take the carbs out, what are we going to put in? Because remember, there's only 3 macronutrients. If one goes down, one has to go up. My patients eat fat, and a lot of it. What, you say? I mean, what's going to happen when you eat fat? Well, let me tell you, you're going to be happy because fat tastes great and it is incredibly satisfying. But remember, fat is the only macronutrient that's going to keep our glucose, blood sugar, and insulin levels low, and that is so important. So I want you to now hear my simple rules for eating. These rules, you have to remember, are even going to be more important if you are one of the tens of millions of Americans who have trouble with insulin levels. Rule number 1, if it says light, low fat, or fat-free, stays in the grocery store, because if they took the fat out, they put carbs and chemicals in. Rule number 2, eat food. The most important rule in low-carb nutrition. Real food does not come in a box, and no one should have to tell you real food is natural. You should know that when you look at it. Don't eat anything you don't like. And eat when you're hungry. Don't eat when you're not, no matter what the clock says. And number 5 is a simple way to remember what we want to avoid. No GPS. No grains, no potatoes, and no sugar. That last one is a biggie, right? No grains? Yeah, no grains. But we have to have them. Nope, they're a carb. But whole grains are so good for us. Well, First of all, there are actually very few foods out there that are truly whole grain, even when they say they are. Most foods that purport themselves to be whole grain are highly processed and the fiber benefit ruined, or they're coming with highly refined flour, usually both of these things. So if you are one of the truly insulin-sensitive people, you can eat real whole grain. But if you are in the enormous slice of our population with insulin issues, it's making things worse. So what if you are one of the real insulin-sensitive people? Can you still eat this way? Yes, I'm a great example. Over a year ago, I decided I would cut my carbs as low as I recommend to my diabetic patients. Now, it's not mandatory for my health like it is for theirs. I'm not insulin resistant, so would this be a problem? No, that's just the thing. Unless you have an exceedingly rare syndrome, then cutting carbs is going to be good for you, even if it's not necessary. I want to show you a couple pictures of my radical food. So this is a common breakfast in my house. So does it look like I just broke my own rule? I didn't, because this muffin is made with coconut flour. I bake all the time still. I just use non-grain-based flours. Coconut, almond, hazelnut, flax, they make delicious things. And this is a typical dinner in my house with a typical starch. That would be the sauteed mushrooms. No, my patients and I eat delightful food all of the time and enjoy it. But what about the research on this? I mean, is this just anecdotal evidence now from my clinic? No. There are dozens of randomized controlled trials looking at low-carb intervention for things like diabetes, cardiovascular risk factors, obesity. They're consistent. It works. There are even a large number of studies showing that low-carb nutrition decreases inflammatory markers, which is making it really exciting for diseases like cancer. We just finished a study in our clinic, and what we did is we took 50 type 2 diabetic patients that were treated with our low-carb, high-fat-based program, and we compared them to 50 patients who were treated with the ADA guidelines. And after 6 months, not only did we find a significant metabolic advantage for the low-carb group, but, and let's face it, this is important, a huge cost savings. Our analysis showed that our patients could save over $2,000 a year just on the diabetes meds they were no longer taking. Just think how fast that adds up in our diabetes epidemic now that we are spending $250 billion a year on in this country. So I want to show you a slide now that demonstrates where that savings is coming from. So this is looking just at the insulin difference in the two groups after 6 months. And what we can see is that the low-carb group was able to decrease their insulin by almost 500 units a day. Whereas in the ADA-treated group, they had to increase their insulin by almost 350 units a day. Two important things. Number one, insulin's expensive. And number two, not all the people in this study were even on insulin, which makes these results even more impressive. But what I would say is that this graph really represents two different approaches to treating this disease. The first, our group with the goal of reversing disease, meaning they need less medicine. And the second group, which very clearly aligns with the ADA guidelines, which states that diabetes is a progressive disease requiring more medicine over time. Progressive, unless we take away the cause. So what's the problem then? Why is this not everywhere? Why isn't low carb the norm? There's two big reasons. Number one, status quo. It is hard to break. There are many agendas involved. We got this notion that low fat was the way to go decades ago, but a recent study just came out showing that there was zero randomized control evidence to recommend to Americans to remove the fat from our diet, and that's how the carbs got added in. It was essentially a huge experiment on millions of people, and it failed miserably. The second reason we don't see it everywhere is money. Don't be fooled. There's a lot of money to be made from keeping you sick. And what we see is with these specialty guideline panels, they are stacked with conflict of interest. So the solution to the diabetes epidemic in my clinic is exceedingly clear. Stop using medicine to treat food. And for a disease whose root cause is carbohydrates, take away the carbohydrates or at least cut them so we can remember what we used to know. We knew it a long time ago. This was said thousands of years ago, and we need, in this day and age, to get back to that notion. Thank you.